welcome back to my channel. So in today's video I have a little tutorial on how I made this little toast keychain out of plush fabric, and this is actually the last plushie in plushie week, which I've been doing from Monday to obviously today, which is Friday. So to start off with making this little plushie, I took some colour of like beigey kind of fabric, and this was just by the brand Shannon Fabrics, and I just kind of folded a piece over on itself. I then took a normal biro pen and just drew out a kind of like bread shape, like looking from the side, and then I cut off all the excess. With those two pieces, I then took a long strip of darker brown plush fabric, and I just made sure this went all the way around one of the pieces. I then attached this piece to one of the bread pieces, and I just attached it at the point where the two rounder bits of the bread shape met. If you're making this, you want to make sure that the fluffy sides are facing each other on the bread piece and the darker brown piece. But basically what you want to do is taking that strip, you want to make sure the edge of the strip at all times is meeting the edge of the bread one, so you want to keep moving it around every time you do a couple of stitches. As you can see here, I'm just really matching up those two end pieces of the beigey colour and the brown colour. With every single stitch, I'm just moving it a little bit more at the time just to get around those curves. Now, because this fabric is quite stretchy, this works really well. Like, this is a lot harder when you use like non-stretchy fabrics like wool felt, other acrylic type felts and stuff like that, so it will be a little bit harder using a more kind of structured piece of fabric. But with this plush fabric, like I said, the back is very stretchy and it just allows you to get like a smoother shape. So once you have that bit done, you'll then want to move on to the longer bit, and that's just a straight line. So what I did was just stretched up both fabrics, pinned it down in place, and just stitched straight down in that straight line. So once I got down to the bottom, I was then faced with a corner. And to do the corners, it is a little bit tricky if you're not used to sewing or anything like that, so just take your time with it and you'll get there eventually. So what you want to do is remove any pins that you have in place, keeping that, you know, brown bit in place from that straight line, and you'll want to kind of move the darker brown piece of fabric around the corner so that the edges line up even going around the corner. They won't line up, you know, directly where the beige fabric finishes, but you just want to make sure it goes around the corner nicely and just pin it in place. Once you have your fabric pinned in place, you'll then want to start stitching, and you'll just want to stitch along the biro line, but making sure that that piece at the back that gathers around the corner is facing down. You don't want to kind of stitch that down, you don't want it to kind of like get caught on the stitch that you put it in, otherwise you'll create a crease where you don't want it. So you just want to pull that bit out of the way so that you don't stitch through, and that you're left with a nice corner on the brown fabric also, like here. So you just want to keep stitching away in a nice straight motion until you have it to the next corner. I had my pin to help me out with this to make sure that all the fabric was measured nicely and I wasn't left with any kind of pleats or overlaps or anything like that, and I just stitched a nice straight line again and did the exact same on the corner again. As you can see here, I removed the pin, I just folded the fabric around and then just pinned it back in place again. I then started sewing around the corner again, just following the line that I drew on the beigey fabric, and again I didn't forget about that fold that creates out the back on the dark brown. I just folded it out of my way so that I could carry on stitching nice and flat, as you can see, folding it underneath, and just carried on my stitching so that the brown fabric folded in a nice corner again. I just basically kept stitching all the way around until the brown bit kind of just met up with the other brown bit. I went around the circle bit and then just went all the way back to the top and then connected the two darker brown bits together. So to connect the two darker brown bits, I sort of just pulled them together and made it look like what I wanted it to look like on the inside, so that I was left with a nice straight seam. I just pinned this in place and sewed it together. Then I realised that I'd sewed on the wrong side of the pin, so I actually had to go in and sew it again so that it was nice and tight, and that stitch along the bottom created a nice edge when you looked in from the right side. So what I then did was just double check that I had it in the right place again and just cut off all the excess. Next, I added the toy safety eyes. I just cut 2 little holes and popped them in, and then popped on the washers on the back. And I did it at this point as it's a lot easier once you have less fabric to kind of get out of your way. So I just went ahead and did it now. What I then did was moved on and took the other beigey coloured fabric and just sewed it to the brown piece. Now I started at the exact same point and right sides together again. As you can see, when you turn it over, all the seams are on the inside. You just then want to start stitching. So like I did on the first piece, I just kind of moved it around with my left hand, making sure that the beige edge was completely up to the brown edge. Now this is quite tricky and it is helped with pins, but on such a small plushie like this, it's really hard to get pins in such a small place. So you just kind of have to kind of go with it on the little curved bits and just kind of take it one stitch at a time, moving it around, stitching, moving it around, stitching, and you just get there in the end with about 10-15 stitches, something like that. I used pins to help me out, kind of pinning it where I did the straight stitches and where I wanted my corners to be. I did kind of just line them up with the bottom piece and just made sure that they were all in kind of the same area, so that I didn't end up, you know, with one corner like right up on the side of it and down. So yeah, I just used the back piece for reference, and I just kind of pinned those corners in place so that I had a rough idea of where I wanted to go, and I just basically kept stitching all the way around. I just did the corners in the exact same way, making sure that there were no creases, no folds or anything like that, and I just stitched at about 1/2 centimetre seam allowance, just like I did on the front. I didn't draw this on, I just kind of eyeballed it really, and just, like I said, just went to about 1/2 centimetre seam allowance. I then made it up to the second round piece, and instead of stitching this, I turned my shape inside out. What I then did was took some toy stuffing and just stuffed the shape very lightly. I didn't make it any dents or anything like that. I didn't want it to be really fat, I wanted it to be like quite flat like a toast slice would be, so I just kind of added enough to kind of fill out the shape. I actually made sure to really stuff the last corner of this, and I did this so that it would be easier to stitch up. So to kind of bring the fabric towards the brown bit, I just rolled it with my thumb to kind of bring out all the fabric to the edges without exposing the raw seams. What I then did was took some brown thread and just closed this seam up basically, and just made sure all the stuffing was securely inside. Once fully stitched up, I then moved that brown thread into the middle and just stitched on a keychain to the very top. If you're making a larger version of this, you obviously won't need to do this, but I'm just making the keychain version just because it's nice and small. So what I then did was took some black thread on a needle and just stitched away a little mouth in between the two eyes. Now you can obviously do this with puffy paint or whatever you want to do it with, but I just wanted to stitch mine on in this case, as I've used puffy paint on a lot of my plushies this week and I just prefer stitching them. I just think it looks a little bit better. So once this was completely done, my plushie was then complete. Now I did think about adding some blush, but I didn't kind of get round to doing it, so I figure maybe I'll just add it another time, or maybe I'll just leave it as it is. I'm not really sure. But I'm really happy with how this turned out. Like, this fabric is so soft. Like, I can't even explain how soft this is. Like, it's just so soft and fluffy. It's just, I don't know. I just love this fabric so much. I don't know how many times I have to say I love Shannon Fabrics plush so much. I always leave the links and stuff to every single bit that I buy and where I buy it from. I buy it from a website called Plush Addict. I absolutely love them, and They're just really, really good. I do believe they ship worldwide too. A lot of people have asked. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye!